All right. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of our literary side hustle project here. And today we are going to be discussing Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children.
Round of applause. Great pick,
Yeah.
Jared. I have a
And
version here sitting by.
oh, there we go. You guys got the same one. That's nice.
Yes.
Yes, and I'm here with my good friends Vasha from Reading by the Rainy Mountain and Chris from the Chronicle of Chris. And channel's excellent indeed. So, this book was written in 1981 by Rushdie. It's not his first book, I don't believe.
No.
His
That is
second one.
Harun of the Sea or something.
And yeah, and so it was, and it was the winner of the Booker Prize when it first appeared, and with good reason. This to me is one of those rare literary masterpieces that really hit it on all levels for me. It is a metaphorical tale about Salim's. How do you say that? Sinai? Is that correct?
I think
And
so.
yeah, and his birth at midnight in 1947, the same day that India also received its or won its independence from the British Empire. And his fortunes are reflected exactly as the fortunes of the nation go. More or less, depending upon how you interpret the magic within.
Or so he claims.
So he claims. I was going to say, from his point of
So
view, yeah, for sure.
yeah, so he claims exactly. This this book has a wonderful um, uh, framing reference with his POV. It's first person, but because of the way the story is told, and because of his magical abilities, he is actually able to delve a lot into his grandparents' history, his parents' histories, and he even is able to talk to Padme, his I don't even know what you would call her, the woman who takes care of him.
Yeah.
In the course of the narrative during the story, which is in a way kind of talking to us as well.
Yeah.
So it serves on that function on so many levels, and there's a lot to get into with this book. So I guess we should probably do some just overall impression there, Chris. What do you think?
Okay, me first. So I think it's an absolutely wonderful book. It's a wonderful book about a character who is a fascinating character, but I don't think is a very good person. For me, coming away from the end of it, it's quite interesting to reflect on Slim himself because he's very questionable in a lot of ways. But so are a lot of the males and the patriarchy that's depicted in this book in total. I think that is sort of a complex discussion point. It the book for me is it's really a historical novel, telling about the history of India, especially in the 20th century. And it goes from this kind of period pre-independence and the hopes and dreams that are kind of contained with independence and how great life is going to be being separated from colonial rule. And it goes straight through, to me, quite interestingly. I know this book was written in 81, but it sort of hits this kind of final point of darkness in a lot of ways, and sort of closes in darkness with this kind of just ended on the very burgeonings of hopes. It sort of does a full loop of his life with the Pisces May Prayer. So to me, it's a really fascinating tale of how one person sees their journey through the history of a country and how they feel it very personally. And actually, even though he has reason to feel like that, I'd suggest that an awful lot of people feel like that, and would feel like that throughout that period of time. And everybody would have their own kind of story with it, with magical realism or without. And like every chapter, I think you said very nicely in your review, Jared, is like its own separate little tale and story, and has its own little narrative within it. But all the pickle jars get put together, all 30 of them get lined up one in a row to kind of create this much larger narrative about somebody's life and about generations and generations of a family. And some really nice things that tie together to it. Some bits that were left sort of unfulfilled, but I think that's just the nature of both storytelling and about the evolution of a country and a place. So yeah, loved it.
Yeah, I think it's quite telling that you pointed out the beginning where there's a lot of hopes and dreams about what's coming for India and what's coming for his family. And but there was a little clue where he said it was this disease of optimism. Like the optimism was there about the future and stuff, but he calls it a disease, and that doesn't have a very good auspicious ring to it, because it means that there's something wrong with this optimism, that it's not going to go and not going to be a happily ever after type of book. And I think that was just such a one awesome phrase.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Vasha, give it to us.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree. Like I don't know that I have too much to add to what you both already put really well. I think just this was a reread for me because I read it in, I don't know, more than 10 years ago, at which point I stopped counting, with for a class called Partition Politics and Fragmented Nation. At the time, I used it as an excuse to read the book. I didn't even know what it was about other than, okay, independence. But now I see, and so I wasn't sure if it would fit the partition politics aspect of it, right? But we see the aftermath of not one but two partitions in this book. So it was a pretty good pick in that sense. And I did learn a lot about history, or get different perspective on it, from just the objective stuff we get in the textbook. Like I think the opening chapter with the grandfather, when he thinks about the thing that breaks him is his struggle with identity, because he's just returned from England, where he was told that his country was discovered by the British, right? Or I don't know, whoever came here first. I guess Vasco da Gama was the guy with the credit of discovering India. And as a child, I never thought to question the use of that language. I recently did. I'm not saying that this is when I started, like this reread is when I started, but it resonated a lot more because of the things that I think about a lot more as an adult, or more adult than I was at the time. Yeah, so there's that. And then I think we talked also about him claiming to have this agency over history, right? Not it even so I love his the way he tells the story, because he is, for all his claims of agency, being sucked into the tide of history, and being like, he has no control, but he's struggling to find control. And that feels very reminiscent for a country that I think is still full of people who believe in all kinds of things. Like don't speak to someone when they're on their way out, bad things will happen. Black cat crosses you, bad things will happen, and so on and so forth. I grew up with with a lot of that. Don't sneeze on your way out. There's a ton of stuff, right? So you attribute agency, this sense of control that you get, or lack of control that you can blame on external events for things that happen to you. This book, I think, really reflects that, which is another thing that really stood out to me, that I don't think I really questioned Salim Sinai's claims of agency the first time I read it. But this time I'm like, really? Are you sure? Is that true? Do you think? But also I think it does work metaphors on such extreme levels. It's so brilliant. His life, again, like you already spoke about, reflecting the track of the nation and things that happened to him, like the cracks, and the way he talks about how he's cracking into a 600 million people, right? Like that I guess was the population of India at the time that he wrote it. So yeah, all of those work really well, but also I think the one that hurts is, and I think it's true, the Midnight's Children, I guess, represent the hopes and dreams of the new nation, and we see over the course of the story that they've been crushed and by an event that takes away freedoms and choices. So yeah, I think it just is a wonderful book, and I really appreciated it, and it gave me a lot to think about.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's very well said, Vasha. Very well said indeed. So
Thank you.
the the very first chapter is called "The Perforated Sheet," and I think I in my review I mentioned how that just the idea of this perforated sheet just represents so much, um, this idea of this denial of knowledge because you're only seeing something through a limited hole and a fractured picture, and it's also giving you, it's not complete information. It's a means of disinformation, which kind of reflects how a lot of governments work. But we see in here that there's a lot of disinformation going on, including from our narrator, most likely. But and and it also is, of course, the fuel for the ambition of this doctor, this perforated sheet. He desires the woman behind the sheet over time, and and he's exploring the possibilities with this, and so it just kind of has a lot of symbolism, and I just really love how he used it all.
Indeed.
Yeah, it was great stuff.
Yeah, it's such a pervasive, not only idea that the perforated sheet is about what people can see and what people let them be able to see, as well. It works both ways,
Yeah.
and we see that explored throughout the book in terms of like even when he's trapped in the basket, again, is a very similar idea to the perforated sheet of what he can see out, and the kind of humorous image of his mom's bum. And there's quite a lot of humor within the story. These things that come out again and again. But it also kind of sets the tone for, I think, about parental responsibility and about how we're influenced by the people around us. I think that's a very big theme of it as well. Sort of linked to the hopes and dreams and optimism, the disease of optimism that you talked about, Jared, insofar as it's sort of planted at the start that the hopes and dreams of everybody are the same going into independence, that they all have the same vision of what it's going to be. But actually, as we go through the book and go through the series, we see that even within the one family, between the aunties, the mothers, the grandparents, and all the rest of them, everybody has a very different idea of what life should be and what they should be. And this kind of pervasive idea that we follow in the footsteps of people that surround us, or the people that are around us influence who we are, that happens an awful lot to Salim throughout the book. And actually, he takes on almost like a chameleon state throughout all the stages of his life, depending on who he's surrounded by and what he ends up doing and all that kind of stuff. And it is linked centrally to that idea of the perforated sheet as well. This idea that the vision or cone that we live through and that we see the world through is shaped by everything, the context. Because we also talk about the two women that are around the people of the perforated sheet and how he talks about those as well. So the context of those things is really, really important, and what the aims of that are going to. And I think that whole idea just comes back again and again, and it gives it such a resonance, I think, throughout the entire book, that every time you think you're going through these 30 kind of stages that we're going through, that this same idea kind of keeps coming back and back. And it ultimately is really great, because I don't think Salim ever notices it. Really, maybe in some small bits, where he talks about literally when it's a hole in a sheet, like his sister singing. He makes the link to them when it's literally the same thing. But when it's kind of sits outside that, he seems to be oblivious of that and sort of his own hubris, I think, clouds an awful lot of that when he thinks he's responsible for an awful lot of this rather than kind of the things that are happening around him, which I think makes it even more interesting.
Yeah. But Padme, he's just telling the truth.
Poor Padme. Even Padme as a character, I must say, she doesn't actually appear in the story until the last chapter. Like literally about 20 pages before the end is when he meets her. For the first time in the story. You know what I mean? And it's when she goes, "It's me," when he describes meeting her for the first time. But yet Padme the whole way through, and I remember being quite confused at certain times about who Padme was because I thought she knew it was at the start, and then it was almost like this omniscient creature, which she is actually because of the way that the story's being told, that she's literally sitting beside him the whole time, and she's finding out about him as much as he's telling the story, which I think kind of frames the whole book in an interesting sense as well.
Yeah, it's really great. I love that. I don't know if you call it a writer's conceit or what have you, but I love how he did it, and I thought it was awesome. And I love the use of all the different various Hindu gods in different situations.
Yes.
Like when he first mentions his nose, comparable only to the trunk of the elephant-headed Ganesh, and then he his what was he, Adam? That's his father, right?
Says, Adam.
Yeah. Adam. Yeah. He says that's a nose to start a family on, my princeling. And there are dynasties waiting inside of it. Like snot.
Yeah.
and that just like kept coming up. His nose, of course, was his main organ of magical power for his abilities, and it just, as it's going through and they keep comparing that, we have the comparison to the other character, Knees, whose knees is his power, Shiva, and the Midnight Children and God of Destruction and stuff. So we have nose and knees going through the whole narrative, and it cracked me up every time I was reading about that stuff.
Yeah, it is pretty funny, and I love that. I always enjoy that when you talk about serious things by adding just the right amount of levity to it, not to the point where you think it's not taking itself seriously, but just enough that you can keep things going and not sink into utter depression, and just think about it on a level that you probably wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, and it's funny because like one of the doctors, I think, referred to it as an alien thing, an invader, and he also in its progress, and he's relating his nose to the progress being a bad thing in India because this was before the independence. So that's kind of a metaphor for Britain being in India, and they're the invader and they're the alien progress. And so it just so much like that. There's so much in this book that just puts those clues together, and it really, really blew me away.
Yeah.
What do you guys make of the exchange of children during his birth? I feel like that's a metaphor for something, and that is a very big part of how this whole thing, of what this whole narrative is built on top of. But yeah, what do you think of that?
So for me, that kind of ties back to one of the things I was talking about in terms of like who the nature versus nurture. I think at that point, the very idea that he was born to Wee Willie Winky, which is a great name at the time, but actually was brought up in a different household, and that shapes who he is. In fact, he carries that around. His relationship with Shiva is affected by the fact that he knows that he stole Shiva's life in a lot of ways. Like, his life would have been very different. And he doesn't seem to realize that was jealousy or fear in him that's coming out. Like, his relationship with Shiva is very much tied to that. And that switch of identity, obviously in the chapter Alpha and Omega, when it comes out and all the rest of it, it deeply affects his relationship with his parents, with his sister, with his aunties and uncles later on, when they were basically trying to shun him away. And actually, as it turned out, the only person that was ever truly his mother was Mary Pereira, and we get to see that come full circle towards the end of the book, because she literally birthed him into that family by switching the boys at the start. And she, while she had shame about it, she owned it in a way throughout the story to come then full circle, and then basically mothered him and looked after him. And he missed that, I think, an awful lot of his life. I think that kind of talks an awful lot about to who he is as a person. It's the fact that he was never really complete. I mean, his relationship with women the whole way through the book is odd. I'm going to be nice and say it's odd, because he never really had a true mother, if that makes sense, and he's always searching for that, and therefore he projects that onto everybody else within the book, every female character, even his sister, and everybody that he comes into his life. And same for father. He looks for different father figures throughout his life as well, and every man that kind of takes care of him at some stage, he attaches himself very closely to, right the way through his life. And I think that those are the things that the switch kind of does to that kind of, it creates a bit that says he doesn't belong in the same way, except in his head, to India, the country.
Right. Yeah. And so as his fate goes the fate of India. And because that's interesting, because he constantly what was I gonna say, he's told, or he finds out through his psychic resonance or whatever, that his father's not his father. And so who's his father? And that's like a question running throughout the whole thing. Like, who's his father going to be? His father disappears down it loses the battle with the jinn, the genie of alcoholism. And I love that comparison, that alcohol is it's a bunch of jinns that takes you over. And that's great. And so and he's constantly looking for that, like you said, that relationship affirmation that he has trouble finding. Well, when he does find it, he loses it again and has to find it again.
Yeah, he talks about how he births a lot of mothers and fathers, right? People who are willing to look after him and take care of him. And for all that he was shunned several times, he was also cared for by a whole horde of people who are willing to call him son.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, I really like that aspect of it, because it is. I'm trying to think what it all means, and I did wonder if the baby swap was maybe some sort of reference to the dispossession of a lot of people during the partition, because they had to move across borders. And the family in this book went largely voluntarily, but I think a lot of people were forced to move. And I did wonder if that baby swap was some reference to that. And what he says, that ultimately it made no difference. He slightly lied to us about that, because we did see the consequence that it had on the family. But in the beginning, when he mentions it, that when they found out, it didn't change anything. Kudos to the grandmother for that. But also, I think joint families are a thing in India, right? And I think they still might be. where like a child is brought up by several uncles and aunties, or even in the neighborhood, like you have a lot of people. Like I used to go to people's houses in after school, and I had people say like she's my adopted granddaughter and so on. So it takes a village aspect of it. I wonder if that's what he's writing about with all the numerous fathers and mothers that he has.
Yeah. Yeah, he had he had his uncle and his aunt for a little while when they was sent away originally. And he also kind of struck up did he strike up a relationship with the general? He kind of replaced his son when a general was very disappointed with his son for wedding the war room, and he
that kid kept wetting his bed until he was late in his 20s.
Yeah. And then of course we had the later on he gets with the magician there. Can't remember his name. Yeah. But the guy was
it's the father. We also get the switch happens a number of times. He ends up switching identity from Indian to Pakistani at the time throughout it. These happen. One of the also interesting things I thought was really funny about it was the fact that even though he wasn't naturally born and therefore should really not have any genetic properties in association, people find those. People see what they want to see when they seen the nose and went, oh, that's his grandfather, right? Coming through right throughout there. He obviously is a lineage straight through. You can see what happened. Now, it just happens it was full of snot, as it turns out. But I think there's a lot in that discovery. And I think that's one of the things that makes this book kind of so rich, is because there are lots of things that twist around, lots of things linked together, whether directly or indirectly or otherwise. And I would like to think that Rushdie, when he was writing it, kind of had certain ones that he definitely had in mind, but other ones that just sort of happen naturally that people see through the text, and that can happen through. So, that kind of identity switch happens again and again throughout the book of who he is, even when he becomes beggar, destitute, and all that kind of stuff. He's also part of the Midnight Children Society, the MCC, whatever you call it. I can't remember the committee, isn't that what you call it? The Midnight Children Committee. That as well as being part of his family, and he kind of sees the differences in the different families that he belongs to.
Speaking of switching of identities, I noticed not so much in the beginning chapters. I don't think he did that too much, but towards the end, after he went to Pakistan, I think he kept switching between referring to Salim in the third person and himself in the first person. He and I couldn't quite figure out why or when he did that. I didn't see a pattern on when he said Salim instead of I. He did it a lot more in the chapter called the Buddha, but he did it a bit before and after too.
Yeah, I think that ties in with his memory and how he's remembering events. And he when he was the Buddha or the Buddha, he he was going under that identity, and so Salim was kind of just like their non-identity that wasn't part of him anymore. And I think leading up to that, he had a lot of because before that was the when he was in Pakistan, and was it his sister that suggested he go into the army?
I think she sent him there.
She sent him there. And I wonder if that created some sort of fracture. I think that's within him, that he was sent away like that. And it's interesting because he early on he says memory is being saved from the corruption of the clocks, and so he always refers to this this idea of corruption being a product of the state having control of time, which is directly relates to when he was born. And I just I'm trying to put those two things together because I know they're related in some way, and that, but that just tells us that his memory, he thinks he's giving us exactly what happened, but he's also telling us it could be corrupted, and so I like how that's put through, and I think that contributes to him referring to himself as Salim rather than when he rather than I at certain points in the story.
That makes sense. And he's sort of wrestling with and extracting the memory all. And I did also wonder if there were certain things that he did not were too painful to remember or hurt or were too intense maybe. Those were the moments also where he sought a certain disconnection from the events by referring to himself in the third person, but I didn't collect enough instances to prove that.
I think it's also something that happens with people who consider themselves to be important. When people talk about themselves and think they are kind of bigger than the individual, they would start to refer to themselves in the third person as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because he does. Yeah, he does also bring it up during intense events of history, I guess. Yeah, and he does. His self-importance does significantly increase when towards the end, when he's making all these claims about the widow having declared emergency just so she could get at the Midnight's children.
Even when it's in his 31st birthday, he says, "Oh, I can't make plans on my 31st birthday. This big thing is going to happen here. People wouldn't understand that I'm going to be my birthday will be responsible for some major event, etc." He has sort of lost the run on himself, I think, a little bit. Although there's enough evidence also to suggest that he might actually be correct. I just think reading it at a different stage of life, sort of like you talked about, Varsha, I think can change your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think I only learned somewhat recently to question the things that the narrators in the book tell you. So yeah, that brings me to maybe talking about Shiva a little bit, because do we have enough evidence to think that he's really as evil as Salim claims him to be? Even towards the end, he could have just been there because he was in the army, and that's it. And
well, Shiva's kind of the opposite of him in a lot of ways. I don't think we really get a sense other than it's kind of distrust and hate from at the start of it. But as we go through the book, he fathers all of these women. He's not impotent. Even he thinks of himself as impotent, but he voluntarily let himself be sterilized, has the vasectomy. He's almost the reverse of Salim in a lot of ways. And of course, he's a very unreliable narrator, so we definitely see that through his eyes. So any kind of positive aspects of Shiva are kind of not shown to us at all. Even to the fact that he excludes him from the Midnight Children's Committee kind of club, whatever it was. He wants to be in control of that. He sees him as a threat very clearly throughout the whole book, and I don't think we ever get a sense of who Shiva really is throughout the book, other than sort of like vague references and referrals about how other people treat him.
Yeah, and it was, you got to remember, when the Midnight's Children's Conference first started, he was still a child, and his biggest fear, of course, was that Shiva was going to find out that he was switched, and so that I can definitely see that being a huge motivation for him acting towards Shiva the way he did. You can kind of at first think, oh, that there might be something else to Shiva that could be sympathetic, and until we get later on, and he starts naming Shiva more his enemy as the tale goes on, and it's interesting because you don't really know what the reaction of Shiva would have been if he found out right away, and how that would have changed the course of history, so to speak, and would that have changed the course of history in India as well, if the if the instance of the switch, which may represent different things in the history for India, would have been found out right away or discovered right away, would that have also changed the course of history and how it went? And that's definitely just something to think about. And it's interesting you brought up how he fathered many children throughout India.
Hundreds, thousands, maybe.
Yeah, because earlier in the book, I think it was in right at the end of book 1, he says, so there was knees and nose and knees, and in fact, all over New India, the dream we all shared, children were being born who were only partially the offspring of their parents. The children of midnight were also the children of time, fathered, you understand, by history. And it can happen, especially in a country which is itself a sort of dream. And I love that passage, because I thought that was just like, I think it relates to what Vasha said, and that everybody is raising these kids, and it's not just their biological parents. They're all being raised by the raising of the nation. And I think that's just a very nice passage there.
Yeah. There was a line in there about how people who have the same word for yesterday and tomorrow, how can they be said to have a grip on time? I found that hilarious, because well, Hindi is not my first language, but in Hindi, the word for yesterday and tomorrow is the same, and I was amused by that when I first learned of it too.
That's interesting, because it definitely lends a sense of timelessness to the language, and that's I found that also when I did research on the Cambodian language as well, the Khmer. They have the same issue with time. There's like yesterday and today, everything's present, and so that I found that fascinating.
Yeah.
It also speaks to how much the book inspires you to actually see how unreliable a narrator Saleem is. It encouraged me to go wikiing quite a lot in terms of actually, as soon as I realized it was not gospel what was coming out of his mouth, and that he was sort of he was kind of telling things from his perspective, to actually go through and see what happens, especially as we get towards the end of the book, where there are major events, and we kind of look at it and go, okay, maybe that wasn't true, maybe that was true, etc. As we go through. So really fascinating from that, and sort of engenders an interest in you, as many good books do, that are tied to kind of realistic events, to kind of say, actually, what happened at the end of this book, and actually what's happening in India now, kind of, it's all kind of one thing, as we see, kind of, as I dipped into it, the kind of one party political state that India created, etc. throughout time. It's all kind of fascinating in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course you got Padme yelling at him.
Yes.
Will you get to the good part? And
the real hero. I think we can all.
Yeah, and he's always like, "Yep, I'll get there, but I got to tell the story my way."
Yeah.
So he's telling you, I'm telling it my way. I'm not. This idea of truth is a changeling. It's a memory and truth may not always coincide. Yeah, there's so many good lines in here that relate to that. Nobody can face the world with his eyes open all the time, which is so true, because when you close your eyes, you miss something. And relating, and closing eyes, of course, means a lot more than just actually closing eyes. It's closing your input, what's coming in from the outside world, and what you then relate back afterwards. Because at times, because you're condemned by a perforated sheet to a life of fragments, and so you can only relate what those fragments were.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, it's so much good stuff.
I was going to say, it just sort of engenders and inspires, doesn't it? But writing of this form and of this depth and of this quality kind of does inspire, like a lot of thought, a lot of introspection, and a lot of that. And the mark, when we think of great books that we've read, it's the ones that do that really stick with you.
Yeah, it really is. And what do you guys think of how does his relationship with what was the girl's name with the bicycle?
Aaron
And
Burns,
Evie Burns.
Evie
or
Burns.
Evie Burns,
Yeah, yeah.
the American.
Yes, yeah. And his relationship with her, do you think that in some way later informed his relationship with his sister, and how that worked out? How his sister was the brass monkey, and which is hilarious.
Yeah.
And kind of his protector, almost, because she took the blame for everything when they were younger, and she, she stood up to Evie Burns in some ways, but Evie Burns was that unattainable thing for Salim, even though, like, we knew it was, even though he kept trying. and then, of course, the ultimate unattainable was the aspect of Jamila Singer. Not only unattainable for him, but unattainable for everybody, because she was behind the sheet and stuff like that. So I just, like, that whole thing was just like her transformation, his sister's transformation, and how it related to the transformation and beginnings of Pakistan, with the split from India and stuff like that, was just like, I thought that was very powerful stuff.
Yeah. Everybody's unattainable. Every female that he comes across, his auntie, his sister, except for Parvati, I suppose. Him, yeah, and she's one of him, but he can't unsee all the other women. He can't unsee his sister. He projects that on it, ruins his relationship with anybody. So his kind of his lack of belonging, or his who he's projecting on his life, has literally ruined him for any future romantic relations or otherwise. Maybe with the exception of Padme, but again, the relationship with Padme is sort of a little bit undefined, because as she's finding out about his life at the same time we are. Like, I again love that bit where he says, and then I get married to Parvati, and she went, what? Again, very humorous and funny at that stage. She says, and he basically pats her down and says, oh, we're coming, it doesn't end well. I'm just a product of my relationships with females in my life. I'm a victim in all of this, which was sort of very revealing of him as a character. But yes, obviously Evie, the character of Evie, being the American person, that she doesn't fit in, and yet he projects a relationship onto her, onto basically onto a sort of colonial power in a lot of ways.
Yeah. That and it's the irony is that he his ability gets brutally taken away later on, where they have the whole he gets castrated and stuff like that. But And that has, of course, its own deeper meaning, where it starts to bring him back. This was a time when he went through that whole time with the war, and he was the Buddha, which was interesting because we got to talk about the drainage of his sciences.
Yes.
And I loved how that took away his ability, whatever he had, the telepathy or whatever you want to call it, and gives him this new ability to sniff out truths and falsities and different emotions, as well as being able to sniff other stuff really well, and how it opened up this whole new world to him. You suddenly realize I wouldn't surprise me if he never really described scent that much in the first half of the book, and then because all of a sudden everything's opened up to him, and he has this whole new a whole new sense of scent, and I just thought that was brilliant how that all played out and led to the next phase of his life in so many ways.
Yeah, the funny drainage of his nose. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, I wasn't going to add very much more than that, other than it changes who he is as a person, because the thing that he's identified for and thing, but again, it doesn't seem to really faze him in an awful lot of ways. It's just kind of he projects that he doesn't want it done. It was done to him rather than anything else. But then he sort of adapts it into another superpower and kind of reasserts his importance on the world and the people around him because of his sense of smell and how he can sniff out kind of people's emotions and stuff. But it's basically the same skill. Instead of being able to mind read, he can smell it. So again, his hubris kind of comes shining through.
And I think that incident is also a really good example of his distorted proportion of self-importance, I think, right? Or what is being done to him, and the reasoning behind why. It might be because his parents, they set up the appointment. He talks about it like it was some great betrayal that they planned behind his back, because they realized he's no longer his son, he's no longer their son and whatnot. And what was the conclusion of that? They took him to a doctor because he was clearly uncomfortable with the state of his nose. So I do think that story is maybe inviting us a little bit to question and rethink everything that Salim Sinai is telling us, just because of the way that was phrased, that the parents are clearly doing it out of concern, but he has seen so many vicious motives in their reason for why they did that. They even had no clue that he was that he had a superpowers because of that, and he probably only learned in retrospect that his superpowers came from snot. So
That's hilarious.
yeah, and he even admits it himself towards the end, right? When he says, "Oh, there was this one time where this old man did something disgusting in front of me, and I would have tied it to all these events and tried to find meaning in it, but now I'm just gonna give him an answer and move on."
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and towards the end we get a lot of reflection on life, and he gets a little bit more humility towards the end of the book. He saw in the mirror when he looked in the mirror. He calls himself a dwarf now. He looks like a dwarf, and he looks in the mirror and he sees humility of a human being to whom history could do no more, a grotesque creature who had been released from his preordained destiny, which had battered him until he was half senseless. With one good ear and one bad ear, I heard the soft footfalls of the black angel of death. and I was just like, but it was so ironic that his son, of course, is not his son.
Yeah.
And and he's born with the ears. The ears of Ganesh, I guess.
Yeah. Son of Shiva and
Parvati. Yeah, I seen that when I was researching. So just to step back to the point of when he finally looks in the mirror, he's done no self-reflection basically throughout the entire story. I mean, that's pretty much what that's saying to me, certainly anyway, is that he has sort of been progressing through his life, asserting himself in the world at every stage, thinking about how important it is and how he's affecting everything else, but never actually looking at himself and seeing himself. He doesn't realize he's become an older man. In fact, he's quite shocked by it. He's like, "Oh my God, what has everybody done to me?" You know, and who he is, and like another really fascinating kind of insight, I think, into the person, and you can definitely see, because again, classic narrative tale, we just sort of follow a central protagonist. We kind of accept them, what they're telling us all the time, to be absolutely true. We have to accept exactly what it is, but actually in this case, the more that we go through the story, the more that we kind of sit back and go, actually, let's question this person. He's not the savior. He's not the hero. I mean, not that there really is a hero in the story, but he sees himself as the hero. He sees himself as the main protagonist in not only his own life, but everybody else's life. And I like how people mock him for it, you know, especially, oh, you got a certificate when you were born. You think that makes you special. And he's almost like, well, I mean, did you get a certificate?
Yep. From the Prime Minister.
Yeah. 15th in line to the Prime Minister, I think somebody said. I think that was one of the lines in it. Somebody that was way down the chain of office at that stage decided to send you a telegram or whatever it was, and you think that makes you important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But wouldn't
it?
Well, I mean, sure.
If you were a 9-year-old kid, wouldn't you believe that?
Framed right above or below? Right above the fisherman's pointing finger.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like what he says about the Midnight Children Conference, how the prejudices of their parents started creeping into the children as they grew older. It all started really innocently, and they all they were just happy to have found similar friends. But then eventually they're like, I can't hang out in the same mind as this person, or I thought that was a very short, pretty brilliant statement.
Yeah, and it makes sense. They're growing up. They're getting lives. They're drifting away. You know, and it's funny how eventually he encounters Pavarotti again, and that's the connection that she makes. You know, it's like we're together again, and it's like coming back to a childhood thing later on in life.
Yeah, and how excited they are to see each other. Well, I guess he was less so than she was, but someone who knows her need to be herself more than she is able to be around these people who are so solidly grounded in reality because they are illusionists, so they have a firmer grip on truth. I love that characterization of them, by the way. Just but
Yeah.
her need to be herself among people who knew what she was, I think that also was very interesting.
Yeah, and she also saved him. Remember, she is the
Yeah.
person that brought him out of Pakistan when everybody was sort of rounding everybody else
Yeah.
up,
Yep.
and kind of smuggled him back in again. He doesn't really give her the credit for that she deserves. In fact, when he has to return the favor in some ways and do something for her, I step up and follow this, be the father of this child, etc. He's almost sort of begrudging about it, even
Mm.
though his life would have been over. He would have been
Yeah.
hunted down and killed from the war. And I think that Parvati character is so interesting. Again, her sense of wanting to belong, the way she calls Shiva to her, etc., is sort of like the real hub. And I actually think that character talks about, because a lot of females within the story are sort of seen as others. You know, there's very much a patriarchal society, both in Pakistan and India here, but that actually the females are very much the core of all the family. They're the bits, the glue that hold the whole society together in a lot of ways. And even when a woman comes into power, she's talked in derogatory terms like the widow, in terms of talking this sort of like pejorative term, and taking away, you know, her humanity in a lot of ways, and kind of projecting her just as the villain at that stage. So I think Parvati is as the kind of bit that is actually central to the MCC at that stage, and not Salim. I think sort of an interesting point to make as we get towards the end of the book.
Yeah, that's a really good point. She is the one who's keeping it together at this point, right? And that does tie back to the role of the women in growing up. Like whatever the state of the family was, it was largely due to the women. I did take a slight bit of issue with him when he went on to name all the women who shaped his life. And he claimed that it was only the women, but I feel like if you made a similar list of the men, you might come up with an equally large number of male influences. But that again goes back to what you focus on in a narrative and what they make it seem as important, like shaping the story, and so what you end up believing because of that, right? But yeah, Naseem, is that her name? Reverend Mother.
Yes.
Yeah, Naseem Aziz, and the assiduousness of the mother Amina Sinai, especially when she goes gambling at the horse races to earn enough money for the father's death. Like,
love that.
Yeah.
But he's continually saved by women his entire life. You know,
That's
the
true.
grandmother is who saves him after the Alpha and Omega. Says he's part of our family. You know, his sister saves him. By sort of getting rid of him, all the rest. Pia saves him. You know, he's continually saved by women through his entire life, and he gives no credence to it the whole way through it. Even Padme, Marie Pereira, they all are the people that he needs saving, and he wants to attach to this father figure that he doesn't have the whole way through, rather than kind of realizing what he has. All the women that he then projects lust or attraction onto, and it's deeply uncomfortable to read sometimes. But and in its own way, I think the first one where he sees his mother from the basket kind of sets it as almost the
mango.
Yeah. Oh God! But it almost projects it as sort of humorous, and it sort of sets the tone through the rest of them. We sort of forgive him because of how that's framed by Rushdie. But if you sit back and think about it and going, "Oh God, this is this is really uncomfortable to read."
Well, I looked at it as he was kind of scarred by the mango incident, and that kind of scarred his viewpoint as he was going older towards other women as well. Because he doesn't. He has a certain level of lust, but he also has a certain level of wait a minute, hands off, because it's like it's scary for him, you know, and he's frightened by the woman in his life as much as he's saved by them, and so I think it all relates to that scarring incident, because he was also hidden in a basket in that incident, so to speak, and it was also a perforated view. You know, it wasn't the big picture. It was the perforated sheet view, in which he, I think, views all the women in his life in one manner or another through that limited visual context or understanding, limited understanding.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. But the fact that he was hidden, it makes it illicit. if you know what I mean. He shouldn't be viewing his mother at that stage or otherwise. And the use of the word mango, I think, is interesting because mango. There were many other words that could have been used, but mango also suggests that you sort of it's juicy, you want to bite into it, that kind of stuff from it. So it kind of gives, while he is scarred from it, he's also attractive. But you know that it has that
it's
double-ended nature to it.
yes, a lot of double entendre there. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
How did you like the Sundarban chapter? That was very different from everything else, right? And
another Heart of Darkness chapter. Yeah.
Which one?
The Sundarbans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
a magical mangrove forest.
Well, again, to me, that whole thing again talks about his lack of accountability because he talks about the ills of everybody else in the war. You know, the fact when they went into the village and raped and did all of that kind of stuff, but he puts himself at the back of it, and everybody else pays with their life, or he sort of paints the picture that everybody got what was coming to them, and he carried them out. And again, that unreliable narrator, even the numbers that he uses and stuff as he talks about the number of people were died, it kind of paints again this picture of Salim as somebody who kind of sits outside of themselves and the world and the actions that they've done. No self-reflection through that whole period. They were there, they did it, but he sort of led those people to their deaths intentionally, as it was. He didn't really want to make them atone. He just kind of led them into the Sunderbans so they'd hear the voices in their head and doing all that kind of stuff. Very powerful chapter, though. Incredibly powerful.
And he was the Buddha during that chapter, right? Yeah.
I think you find it as Buddha. Buddha. They explain the difference.
It's Buddha.
Well, Buddha. So we're all wrong. So these are the guys that worship, and then Buddha.
Buddha and Buddha. Buddha means old man, and Buddha is the Buddha, and and he discussed the pun in that name too a little bit, right? Yeah.
They sound identical to me. Thanks, Varsha. They sound identical to me.
That's fair. It's that they just it's.
I'm an idiot.
Oh, okay. So, like Chris said, Buddha. All right.
I was wrong. Continue to be wrong, but I can't change it now.
So during that time, that re-identification of who he is gives him as a narrator a sense of, like you said, a sense of hands off, a sense of, I am not responsible for what I do under a different name type of thing. And you're very right. You can't completely trust that as a reader.
Yeah, but it was hilarious when they talk about this canine unit called Kutia, and their Kutia is Salim because of his nose.
Yeah. That's like the nose thing in a military aspect. It really would be a huge asset to a company if it was real. Of course, we don't know how real it is, based upon this unreliability. But he is that they are following him, and he is supposed to be a scout, and he is, in his head at least, using his nose as the means of that leading them around. And it was just that, like you said, Chris, that's felt so Heart of Darkness. That felt so Apocalypse Now, and it was pretty harrowing at times, and it was just very powerful, like you said.
Yeah. It's also, I think, the main time within the book that actually people do follow him and take his lead. I think, all the other times he projects himself in that position and it's kind of not really, you're not really sure whether anybody's ever listened to him or anything. But in that case, they are, those young men are scared and they're just following him because they trust probably his own hubris. And he says, no, I can smell this. And they're going, well, we're lost. We'll follow him. And the outcome of it is very dark.
Yeah, certainly is. Yeah. Those I was curious about whether the incidents where they go through and basically purge the undesirables out of, was it Delhi? If that was actually a historic event that happened at all or not. I'm not sure myself, but
It is possible that it happened. I wouldn't be surprised. Like the sterilization camps were definitely a thing, I think. And I don't remember what my source for this is, but I think a lot of people were lied to, promised food and grains and stuff in exchange for a small medical procedure, which turned out to be a sterilization procedure.
right.
I think that was a thing she did. Pretty sure. But
That Indira Gandhi did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
During the emergency, I think. There was a Tamil movie in which there was a comedy segment in which this guy gets fooled into getting a vasectomy, and I thought at the time that was a ridiculous joke, but then I found out later that it actually did happen, I think. So that part is probably true. The slums, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I did a bit of reading about all that. The sterilization, I actually didn't realize how prevalent it was within India over an extended period of time, not just in that one. And actually, it was this one apparently was instigated by Nixon. That they would not provide aid and support without a sterilization program with Gandhi. That's what was on Wiki when I read it earlier, because I was sort of horrified. But again, unreliable narrator. He says it was because they wanted to wipe out the midnight children. I suspected that there would be some relevance to it at the end, and then read a bit more about it. I suspect there's plenty more to read about it, but that whole bit again was very dark in terms of like they're doing. But again, the contrast of male versus female. The males had vasectomy. Parvati was killed. The females died. And he equates it as being the same. It's also kind of fulfilling his own lie, if you know what I mean. The guy said to him, "Don't you be lying about being sterile, because that has a way of, a bit like you said at the start, Varsha, about the kind of black cat crossing you and all that kind of stuff. You can't be saying things like that because that will put it on down the line and sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways." So again, dark to read about and kind of be horrified at, actually, but the truth, I think, is a bit different than what actually happened there, even though as horrific as it was.
Yeah.
So touching on a lot of dark themes throughout the book, throughout the this like you said, a historical novel of a type, and and then how it ends on not a happy note at all. It's quite gloomy. He can see the cracks on his back of his hands, along his hairline, between his toes. Why do I not bleed? Am I already so empty, desiccated pickle? Am I already a mummy of myself? And he's only supposed to be 31 years old.
Yeah.
How the hell can you look that old at 31? But given what he's gone through, and given the fact that, like you said, Chris, You don't really get that, other than we get plenty of descriptions of his nose, but but yeah, like you said earlier, you don't get that mirror reflection of him until he really looks back on his life and starts seeing how old he is at such a young age. So not a happily ever after.
The son whom he called, did he,
Adam.
Adam, yeah, him too. He's sort of hopeful about a new generation of children who will get what they want, as opposed to being swallowed up by the tides of events like his generation was. I think that was interesting, like, because that also had a bit of a bittersweet note to it, that this may or may not be a good thing, but there is hope yet. And that empty pickle jar that he leaves in the end for, here, fill this with whatever you think is fit. I thought that was a lovely note to end the book on.
Yeah, the numbers and the way he illustrates the numbers as being like enormous numbers, but also not enough to fill one spoon.
Yeah.
In some ways, I thought that was very,
right.
It was very illustrative of the kind of metaphor that he'd been setting up with this pickle jar and all the rest of it, and how life could be fit inside one pickle jar, 30 pickle jars, but actually the numbers kind of don't really mean as much as you think.
Yeah.
Or in his perspective anyway.
And I love the metaphor of pickling memories, especially when tied with Mary. How do you say her last name? Pereira.
Yeah.
Pereira. Mary Pereira's superpower of putting in her emotions into the food she makes, especially the chutneys, because pickling preserves, but it also fundamentally changes the nature of the thing that you consume, right? And also memories have the taint, to quote unquote taint, of your own emotions from experiencing them or hearing them. And so all of that together I think is just a brilliant piece of metaphor for what he did here.
Yeah, that pickled memories right here. That's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah, brilliant book. Brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant
book.
book. Yes.
All told, I think we agree it's a brilliant book. So, any last thoughts on Midnight's Children besides pickled memories?
No, I can't really think. I can see it being a book that I reference a lot going future. Future discussions. I think I'll kind of hold it as kind of a standard bearer for a certain type of historical novel, for a certain way to tell a story, for a certain way to tell a story with characters that are imperfect and maybe not that likable, but incredibly interesting, and how you can use imperfect characters as a lens to view a world through, and for it to enhance that. And also in how brilliant a pure metaphorical novel can be, because I think if you'd have told me at the start about how everything that happens in it is metaphor for something else, I would have told you that I would have got tired of that very quickly, and yet never once got tired of it in here, because it's so masterfully done and used.
Yeah, that's well said, and it's also the what you said about the characters being interesting. It's, you don't have to like them at all, but they're endlessly fascinating. Him as a character, and all the other ones that he brings into the story. I found I wanted to know more about all of them every time he mentions something, and then he goes and mentions something all the time in a metaphorical means, and it's I think I found it extremely beautiful to make my way through this, and anybody out there who's going to be reading this, well, I hope you read it already if you would listen to this whole conversation, but I would say, if you're going to read it again, take your time with it, because I took my time with it, and I think you get a lot out of it if you don't blaze your way through it. It's that good.
Cool.
Yeah. Good book.
All right. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, for those of you who joined us, thank you so much for watching. And please visit Reading by the Rainy Mountain and visit the Chronicle of Chris. And next book is going to be for our literary side hustle here.
The Cave.
The Cave.
By Jose Saramago, I believe. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes. So
And that will be over in Varsha's channel. Yeah.
Yes, that will be over on Varsha's channel. Yes. Excellent. Awesome. Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun.